I served in Congress with Bernie, and I lived in Denmark, and Bernie has talked a lot about Denmark and how wonderful that is as a social welfare nation.
Got a lot of love for Denmark.
And it's a lovely country, and I have the same feelings of affection for Denmark. The difference is that Denmark is a very different kind of country. It's a small country of 5.5 million people. Everybody has blonde hair and blue eyes, and they're all about between 5'10 and 6'4", but more importantly, they are a country that has a very strong tradition of centralized government, of social welfare programs. The United States really does not have the same level of trust for the federal government that exists in a social welfare country like Denmark. And I think that the leader that is going to implement the fix in the healthcare program is going to have to understand that in order to get the country to accept it on a broad basis, that leader is going to have to do that with both Republican and Democratic support. That's going to be very difficult, especially with someone like Bernie, who has worked very little with Republicans, very little with Democrats, not to mention Republicans over the 24 years that he's been an independent in the U.S. Congress.
Well, I did work with Senator McCain on a Veterans Administration policy.
Sure, and that's one example. But unfortunately, that's one example, and there are hundreds of where he didn't. And so my feeling is that someone like a Hillary Clinton is going to have much more success in ferreting out the waste and inefficiency that exists in hospitals, that exists in pharmaceuticals, that exists in doctor care, that exists in the insurance industry. And those are the places where we're going to bring the cost down equivalent to what people are paying in Canada, people are paying in Germany, people are paying in Denmark. But my belief is that it'll probably look more like a German system where there's a mixture of private and public so that we can achieve those savings in a way that is acceptable to both parties.
A lot of people are worried that, yes, Secretary Clinton will compromise more, but it will be the type of compromise that leans right. A growing groundswell of young people really feel it's time for like radical change. You know, the concentration of wealth over the last 30 years, skyrocketing, you know, the 1%
Sure.
number. Why would the average American think that Secretary Clinton would tackle those problems aggressively?
Because I think that she will be listened to, and there's no doubt that Bernie has served a very important purpose. He has raised the issues to a decibel level that is being heard, but I don't think that he can get the job done. I think that Hillary, quite frankly, is someone who can take what Bernie is saying and actually implement it in such a way that it is acceptable to the entire country. When Bernie calls for revolution, one has to realize that these are the kinds of things that you say, be careful what you pray for, because you might ultimately end up getting it. And that kind of a revolution could be far more damaging to the entire country than it is beneficial. And so my feeling is that we need leadership who will take the concerns that we have about the haves and the have-not disparity becoming too great, who can take the concerns that we have for the cost of health care and the fact that there are still 20 million people who are not getting it, and rectify those things over the next administration. I don't think that Bernie is up to that task. I think as you look into and ask the questions, how is this going to be paid for? How is this going to be implemented? Even the young people who are certainly quite seduced by this whole idea that it's all going to be free are going to realize that that's not the case.
For the novice, why is it the sheer number of Americans, you know, over 320 million, makes it more difficult here? Is it?
Well, have you traveled overseas?
Yeah.
And where have you been?
Israel, Brazil.
Okay, and have you talked with them about their approach to government?
Yeah, more centralized a lot of those.
Okay, right. So there's a big difference. Our DNA comes from all the people that left those countries who were concerned that government was too big, that they had no chance to be able to make it in this world on their own. So they came to the United States, the land of opportunity. This contrasts with Bernie's big message that, you know, the haves are getting all the money and the have-nots are not getting. That is not exactly the case, but there is a concern that the disparity in wealth is widening and the gap is widening.
When you say it's not the case, I mean, the chart tells it all over the last 30 years.
Well, the fact of the matter is that people
stagnant.
are still able to make it in the United States that come here from abroad. This is still an immigrant nation. We are still building an economy based on immigrant labor. Now, you're right. The chart does show that the wages are stagnating more for the lower end of that chart line than they are at the upper end, and there is certainly things that need to be done about that. But again, I think you don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And what Bernie is trying to do is he's saying, he uses his words, revolution, to change the whole system. I don't think the system needs to be changed. It needs to be corrected. It needs to be fixed. And what he's proposing needs to be implemented, but in, I believe, a U.S. capitalist way, not in a European socialist way.
For the average American, there's been a lot of talk about Secretary Clinton. On one end, she's talking about Wall Street reform, but many people, including myself, feel her actions might not match. The speaking fees, her career, she's gotten a lot from Wall Street. Why would the average American think that she isn't compromised at all from those relationships?
Well, because I would say that as a candidate for president, she has one currency that she's dealing with, and that's your vote and my vote, and everybody's vote in this room and all around the world, around the country. So the fact that she received $600,000 speaking fees from Wall Street 2 years ago or 4 years ago or whatever it was, that is not motivating her judgment. And I think what you'll find is that she's going to be acting upon the things that she realizes her constituents, the voters, are demanding out of her leadership. And so I think that that's going to be what rules the day.
Do you think there's an error in judgment by going to speak to those people if she was considering running for president?
No, I think she needs to go to them and tell them that there's a problem that needs to be fixed. I think she needs to tell them that when things go badly, you don't give yourselves billion-dollar bonuses, but you put that money into the corner bank so that people don't lose their mortgages. I think there are all kinds of things that can be done that Wall Street needs to do, but we still need Wall Street to also regulate, and not so much regulate, but stimulate our economy, and to be the basis of the stock market and the equities that are an important part of our economy. There's no problem with speaking truth to power. That's what we need. That's what Bernie is doing. I don't think that Hillary is less capable of doing that. I think she is more effective in doing that. And I think that together Bernie and Hillary could be a very good combination that will enable us to correct some of the problems that have gotten out of hand. Bernie is promising free education, free this, free that, and it's not free. Hillary Clinton is saying, I will do certain things to correct the system, but I'm not going to make a blanket statement. I'm not going to just, bust up all the banks just because that's the best thing to say in front of a crowd of 3,000 people. And that's what I think we have to be very careful about, is that when we start demagoguing the issues, then we are going to really run into trouble, because we're going to start raising expectations to a level that cannot be met. What happens when he doesn't succeed? Well, I think you're going to have then you're going to have the wrong kind of revolution, I'm afraid.
A lot of things were said that it could never happen,
Well, that's the problem. And then I think
8 years ago, they would have said, a guy named Barack Hussein Obama, that's not going to happen. So why is it? It seems that there's definitely a difference between the younger people who still are idealistic and not that you're, dying on the wall, but you're an older gentleman who's basically saying, the system is what it is and we can't change it.
No, I'm actually a very idealistic person. But if you looked at what I'm doing, you would see that I'm doing things that will actually implement the change that we're talking about. I'm not talking about change, I'm doing change. And that's the big difference. Bernie is someone who talks about change. He doesn't do it. He hasn't done it. He's never been as effective in his lifetime as someone who's out in the world doing the work, providing the jobs, and creating the new communities, putting in the solar technology, and making the world a better place.
People in Burlington, Vermont would say he did a lot for them.
Well, he
was an executive.
He's
got more executive
He did a better
experience.
job. He did a better job as mayor of Burlington, I would say, than he has done as a member of Congress.
Well, you were a former congressman.
Yes.
Could one congressman, change all of America? I mean, that's more of the executive role as a president.
I think that's my point. And my belief is that he is, based on what he is saying, is not going to be as effective a president as Hillary Clinton.
So do you think Secretary Clinton, for example, on the TPP trade deal, originally was for it, then she evolved, as she says. Should people think that this is just genuine change of policy, or she's making political calculus?
Well, I think that what the difference between the two of them is that one is a totally transparent, totally consistent person who has run his life along those lines for the last 50 years. I think the other is a politician who has been very effective and understands that in politics you have to weigh the good and the bad on both sides, and you have to come up with a coalition that will enact the best solutions. And I think that she has been very effective in that regard.
You've been speaking a lot about, Hillary might not speak the way Bernie does, but her policies are more likely to actually get what young people want done.
Well, if you look at her record, she has gotten a lot done. She has worked for the Children's Defense Fund. She has obtained 8 million coverage for 8 million children in health care insurance. I mean, she has done things over the course of her career that she wasn't even in elected office to get done.
She's very experienced. Absolutely.
Well, not only experienced, she has accomplished a great deal.
But
Bernie has done a very good job at putting a pedestrian street in Burlington, Vermont, and there's no argument there. But what has he done in the U.S. Congress? He's not done much at all. He's worked with the veterans. That's one thing he's done, so I'll grant you that. But he has not worked with Democrats. I'm a Democrat, and he hasn't worked with our side of the aisle. Certainly hasn't worked with the Republicans much at all. And so I'm very concerned about that.
Well, if Democrats are making deals with Republicans that don't help the middle class, is that a bad thing that he doesn't go along with them?
Well,
I mean, many people would say the last budget deal that they just agreed on, which gave 60% of the cuts to business and 40% to middle class people, is not a good deal.
Well, my point would be that the Democrats and the Republicans have to figure out how to serve what's in the best interest of the majority of the American people. And I would say let's put up a what we would call a design review committee in Congress that would look at, is this legislation going to have a positive impact on the greatest number of people in the middle class before it helps the wealthy or it helps the poor. But those are the things that I think this whole discussion in this campaign is being carried on by both candidates, and it's not one or the other that is going to carry that conversation forward. They're both going to do it, and who's going to be more effective? I think Hillary will be more effective.
Well, I don't want to sound cynical, but I feel...
Well, now I thought you were the idealist.
I am an idealist.
Well, but now you're saying you're cynical.
No. What I'm saying is your statement seems to be on the assumption that Republicans are that concerned about the middle class and they want to compromise.
Well, if you listen to John Kasich, I think you'll find a Republican who is concerned about the middle class and has done a great deal to do good things for them.
No, he's done more than others, absolutely.
So I'm just giving you an example.
But the Republican Congress, who you would agree has become a little bit more extreme over the last few years.
That's why we need Hillary or Bernie as the president. I think Hillary will do a better job.